The wind, a constant companion in the Dakota Territory of 1882, whipped Ilara's dark braids around her face. She pulled her worn shawl tighter, her gaze sweeping across the vast, open land that was both her home and a place of constant struggle. Ilara was a woman of two worlds, her heritage a blend of native spirit and settler grit. Her mother's people had walked this earth for countless generations, their language a song carried on the very wind she now felt. Her father, a kind but quiet man, had come from far away, bringing with him different stories and a different way of speaking. Ilara carried both within her, a rich tapestry of understanding that few others in the scattered settlements shared. It was this understanding, this deep love for her mother's tongue, that led her to a small, hidden grove of cottonwood trees each afternoon. Here, away from prying eyes and judgmental whispers, a handful of children gathered. Their faces, a mix of curious native eyes and wide-eyed settler children, looked up at her with eager anticipation. Today, she was teaching them the names of the birds that soared overhead. Kingi for crow, Zientkala for bird in general. Their small voices, soft at first, grew bolder as they repeated the words, their laughter light and free. Ilara's heart swelled. She knew the risks. Speaking the old language was seen as a defiance, a clinging to ways that many wanted to erase. But Ilara believed it was a gift, a connection to the past, and a bridge to the future. She taught not just words, but stories, songs, and the deep wisdom held within them. Each lesson was a tiny act of rebellion, a quiet stand against the forces that sought to silence her people. She felt the weight of her secret, but also the immense joy of sharing something so precious. The joy Ilara felt in the cottonwood grove was a fragile thing, easily shattered by the harshness of the world outside. One blustery afternoon, as the children were practicing the word for wind, a harsh voice cut through their innocent chatter. A group of men, led by Mr. Abernathy, the sternest man in the nearby settlement, emerged from the trees. Their faces were grim, their eyes cold with judgment. One of the settler children, frightened, had told his parents about Ilara's lessons. Abernathy grabbed Ilara roughly by the arm, his grip like iron. Teaching that heathen tongue, are we? He snarled, his words sharp as a whip crack. Didn't we make it clear that those ways are to be forgotten? Ilara stood tall, her chin held high, even as fear gnawed at her. The children scattered, their happy faces replaced by terror. Abernathy dragged her back towards the settlement, his anger drawing the attention of townsfolk who stopped their chores to watch. A small crowd gathered, some with pity in their eyes, others with agreement etched on their faces. In the dusty square, Abernathy tied Ilara to the old hitching post. The sun beat down, making the air thick with tension. He then took a leather strap, thick and well-used, from one of his men. Ilara closed her eyes, preparing herself for the pain she knew was coming. Each strike of the whip was like a brand, not just on her skin, but on her spirit. Yet, through the searing pain, she refused to cry out. She would not give them the satisfaction. She thought of the children, of the words she had taught them, and held on to the belief that what she did was right, no matter the cost. The public whipping was meant to break her, to serve as a harsh warning to anyone who dared to defy the unspoken rules of this new world. But with each stinging blow, Ilara's resolve, though bruised, did not shatter. Among the small crowd gathered in the dusty square, a lone figure stood apart, his hat pulled low. Silas, a rancher whose quiet life was spent tending cattle on the edges of the settlement, watched the cruel scene unfold. He was a man of few words, his face often hidden behind a thick beard and thoughtful eyes, but his heart was not untouched by what he saw. He had ridden into town for supplies, expecting the usual hum of daily life, not this stark display of human cruelty. Silas had known Ilara by sight, had seen her sometimes riding her horse along the prairie, a graceful silhouette against the wide sky. He knew of her mixed heritage, though he had never spoken to her. Now, seeing her tied to the post, enduring such pain with quiet strength, something shifted within him. The sound of the whip cutting through the air, the sharp crack echoing in the sudden silence of the square, filled him with a deep, churning anger. It wasn't just the physical pain being inflicted, but the sheer injustice of it all. To be punished for sharing one's own language, a part of who you are, seemed utterly wrong to Silas. He saw the fear in Alara's eyes, quickly hidden, and the way her body tensed with each blow. He also saw the hardened faces of some in the crowd, their approval chilling him to the bone. Others looked away, unable to bear witness, but none stepped forward. Silas felt a heavy sadness settle over him, a sense of helplessness. He was just one man, and speaking out would only bring trouble upon himself, perhaps even put him in Alara's place. Yet, simply standing by felt like a betrayal of something important. He clenched his fists, his gaze fixed on Alara, a silent promise forming in his heart that this injustice would not be forgotten. The image of her defiant stance, even in her suffering, burned itself into his memory. The memory of Alara's unwavering gaze, even as the whip fell, haunted Silas long after he left the settlement. He returned to his ranch, the wide-open spaces usually a comfort, now felt heavy with the weight of what he had seen. He couldn't shake the image of her courage, her refusal to break. It wasn't just sadness he felt anymore. It was a quiet determination. He hadn't been able to stop the whipping, but perhaps he could do something to mend what was broken. An idea, small at first, began to grow in his mind, like a seed planted in fertile soil. He had spare lumber, left over from building his barn. He had tools. He had land, a quiet spot near a creek on his property, far enough from town to avoid immediate scrutiny, yet accessible. What if he built a place? A small, simple structure, just one room, where Alara could teach again. It wouldn't erase the pain, but it could offer a new beginning, a safe harbor for the forbidden lessons. The next morning, before the sun had fully climbed the sky, Silas was already at work. He chose a spot under a sturdy oak tree, its branches offering shade and a sense of enduring strength. He measured, he sawed, he hammered. His hands, calloused from years of ranching, found a different kind of purpose. He worked tirelessly, driven by a silent vow. Each nail driven was a defiance against the injustice. Each plank raised a step towards hope. He thought of the children, whose eager faces Alara had enlightened, and imagined them gathering once more, their voices learning new words in safety. Days turned into weeks. Silas toiled alone, his only companions the rustle of leaves and the distant lowing of his cattle. He built the walls sturdy, cut out openings for windows, and crafted a simple door. It was humble, yet each piece was imbued with his quiet respect for Alara and his deep belief in the right to knowledge. This small building, rising slowly from the prairie grass, was more than just wood and nails. It was a symbol, a promise, a quiet act of rebellion against the forces that sought to silence. It was a schoolhouse, born from injustice, built with hope. Alara nursed her wounds in the quiet solitude of her small cabin, the pain a constant reminder of the injustice. Yet, even through the physical ache and the sting of humiliation, a strange story reached her ears. A lone rancher, Silas, was building something on his land. Whispers carried across the prairie, speaking of a small, one-room structure rising near his homestead. At first, Alara was wary. Why would a settler build anything like that, especially after what had happened? Curiosity, mixed with a faint, unfamiliar stir of hope, eventually drew her out. One afternoon, wrapping her shawl tightly, she rode her horse towards Silas's ranch. As she approached, she saw him, his back bent over a saw, shaping a wooden beam. The sight of the half-built structure, humble yet purposeful, stopped her. It looked like a schoolhouse. Her heart, which had felt heavy and cold, warmed just a fraction. Silas, sensing her presence, straightened up. He turned, his gaze meeting hers. There were no words, just a shared moment of understanding. In his eyes, Alara saw not pity, but a quiet respect, and something akin to a silent apology for the world's harshness. She saw the sweat on his brow, the calluses on his hands, and the honest effort he had poured into this unexpected creation. Slowly, carefully, Alara dismounted. She walked towards the rising walls, her hand tracing the rough wood. "What is this?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. Silas gestured to the building. "A place," he said simply, his voice a low rumble. "For learning." A flicker of hope, hesitant but real, bloomed within Alara. Despite her pain and the deep-seated distrust she held for many settlers, Silas's quiet action spoke louder than any words. Without a spoken invitation, she picked up a discarded piece of lumber. "What needs doing?" she asked. Silas looked surprised. Then a small, rare smile touched his lips. "The roof," he replied, handing her some nails. And so, Alara, though still hurt, began to help. As they worked side by side, a fragile thread of trust began to weave between them, piece by painstaking piece, like the very structure they were building. Each hammer blow, each shared task, slowly chipped away at the walls Alara had built around her heart. The work on the schoolhouse continued day after day, each swing of the hammer and lift of a plank bringing Alara and Silas closer. At first, their conversations were practical, focused on measurements and materials. But as the walls rose and the roof took shape, their words grew softer, more personal. During breaks, sitting on overturned buckets as the sun dipped low, they began to share pieces of their lives. Alara spoke of her mother's people, of their deep connection to the land, of the songs and stories that wove through their lives like the prairie grasses. She told Silas about the meaning behind the native words she cherished, how they didn't just name things but held feelings and histories. She shared her worries for the children, for a future where their heritage might be lost. Silas listened, truly listened, his quiet presence a comfort. He didn't interrupt or judge. He simply absorbed her words, a respectful silence filling the spaces between them. In turn, Silas spoke of his journey west, of the hard work of building a ranch from nothing, and the loneliness that often came with it. He talked about his own family, long gone, and the simpler life he had known before the harsh realities of the territory. He confessed his own frustrations with the narrow-mindedness he sometimes saw in the settlement, the quickness to condemn what was different. He didn't often speak of such things, but with Alara, the words came more easily, as if the rising schoolhouse was breaking down walls within him too. They discovered shared values, a love for the open land, a belief in hard work, and a quiet strength that had seen them both through difficult times. Alara taught him a few native words, and Silas, with a shy smile, tried to repeat them. She corrected his sounds gently, her laughter still a rare thing, light in the evening air. He showed her how to properly plane a rough piece of wood, his big hands guiding hers. Through these small exchanges, the cultural gaps that once seemed vast began to shrink. The mistrust Alara carried, a heavy cloak she'd worn for so long, slowly loosened its hold, replaced by a growing understanding and a quiet, blossoming friendship. The last nail was hammered, the final pane of glass set into its frame. The schoolhouse stood complete, a small, proud structure gleaming faintly in the prairie sun. It was humble, just one room with a simple blackboard and a few rough-hewn benches, but to Alara, it felt grander than any mansion. It was a place born of kindness and courage, a testament to what could be built when hearts opened. On the appointed morning, Alara felt a mix of nerves and excitement. She had spread the word quietly, relying on the children who had once gathered in the cottonwood grove and their families to share the news. She dressed in her best skirt and a clean blouse, her braids neatly tied. As she walked towards the schoolhouse, the morning air was crisp and clear, carrying the promise of a new day. Silas was already there, standing by the doorway, his presence a steady anchor. He didn't say much, just offered a small, encouraging nod. His quiet support was more powerful than any grand speech. It told her she was not alone this time. She took a deep breath, feeling the sun on her face, and walked inside. The room, though empty, felt full of possibility. Slowly, shyly at first, the children began to arrive. Not just the native children, but some of the settler children too, their parents' curiosity and perhaps a growing openness outweighing their fears. They squeezed onto the benches, their eyes wide and hopeful. Alara looked at their faces, a beautiful mix of cultures, and a profound sense of peace settled over her. This time, she wasn't hiding in a grove. She was standing openly, confidently, in a schoolhouse built just for this purpose. She began her first lesson not with words, but with a story, told in both native tongue and English, weaving the two together seamlessly. Silas watched from the doorway, a soft smile touching his lips. The sounds of children learning, of different languages blending, filled the small room, carried by the prairie wind. It was a sound of healing, a sound of new beginnings. Alara, with Silas's silent strength beside her, had found her voice again, louder and more determined than ever. The little schoolhouse quickly became a place of wonder. Each morning, children arrived, some on foot, some on horseback, their faces bright with curiosity. There were children whose families had lived on this land for generations, their ancestors' stories etched into the very rocks and rivers. And there were children whose parents had traveled far, bringing with them new languages and different ways of seeing the world. Inside the schoolhouse, these differences began to fade. Alara, with her patient smile and gentle voice, created a space where everyone felt welcome. She taught them numbers and letters, just like any school. But she also taught them about the cycles of the seasons in the native tongue, about the plants that healed and the animals that shared their home. She told them stories of courage and kindness from both her heritages, showing them that wisdom could be found in many places. At first, the children were shy with each other. A native boy might hesitate to sit next to a settler girl. But soon, the natural curiosity of childhood took over. They shared their lunches, traded drawings, and helped each other with tricky words. Laughter, once a rare sound in the divided territory, now echoed freely within the schoolhouse walls. They learned each other's games, their shouts of joy mixing in the prairie air. Silas often watched from a distance, mending a fence or tending his horses, a quiet guardian. He saw the way the children's eyes lit up, how they learned to say Thokahia first and Iohi each with equal ease. He saw a settler girl proudly showing a native boy how to write his name, and a native girl teaching a settler boy to count to 10 in her language. These small moments were powerful. They were building bridges, not with wooden nails, but with understanding and friendship. The school was a living testament to Alara's belief that knowledge, shared freely, could heal the deepest divides and create a new sense of belonging for all. The growing success of Alara's schoolhouse, with its mix of native and settler children learning together, did not go unnoticed. While many parents, seeing the joy and progress in their children, offered their quiet support, others in the settlement clung to old prejudices. Mr. Abernathy, in particular, saw the school as a direct challenge to his authority and the proper way of things. One afternoon, as Alara was teaching the children about the constellations, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. It was Abernathy, riding with a few other stern-faced men from town. They dismounted roughly, their presence casting a dark shadow over the peaceful schoolyard. "This won't do, Silas," Abernathy boomed, his voice startling the children inside. "You're harboring a nuisance, and she's filling these children's heads with godless native gibberish." Silas stepped forward, his usual quiet demeanor replaced by a steely resolve. "This is my land, Abernathy," he stated, his voice calm but firm. "And this is a school. Children are learning." "Learning what? To defy decent folk?" Another man scoffed. "These children should be in a proper school, learning English, not some savage tongue." Alara emerged from the schoolhouse, her heart pounding, but her gaze as steady as the prairie horizon. "Children learn many things here," she said, her voice clear. "They learn to read and write, and they learn about respect for all people and all ways of knowing." Abernathy glared at her. "You have no right to teach. You were warned." "I have every right," Alara replied, standing beside Silas. "And these children have every right to learn." The tension in the air was thick. The children, peeking from the windows, watched with wide eyes. Silas put a hand on Alara's arm, a small, reassuring gesture. "We stand by this school," he told Abernathy, his eyes unwavering, "and we will continue to teach." Faced with their united front and the quiet strength radiating from them, Abernathy and his men grumbled, exchanged frustrated glances, and eventually turned their horses and rode away, defeated for now. Alara and Silas knew this wasn't the last challenge, but together they had held their ground. The challenges from Abernathy and his kind only served to strengthen the invisible bonds between Alara and Silas. Standing together against prejudice, their shared purpose deepened their connection far beyond mere friendship. After the children left each day and the sounds of learning faded, Alara would often stay a while longer, helping Silas with small chores around his ranch or simply sitting with him on the porch as the sun set. Their conversations grew even quieter, filled with comfortable silences and knowing glances. Alara found herself looking forward to these moments, to the steady warmth of Silas's presence. She admired his strength, not just his physical strength from working the land, but the quiet courage he showed in standing up for what was right, even when it was unpopular. She saw the kindness in his eyes, the deep understanding that shone through his reserved nature. Silas, in turn, was captivated by Alara. Her resilience, her passion for teaching, and the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of her heritage stirred something profound within him. He found himself thinking of her long after she rode home, missing the sound of her voice, the gentle rustle of her skirts. He admired her spirit, unbroken despite the hardships she had faced. One evening, as they watched the first stars appear, their hands accidentally brushed as they reached for a dropped tool. A spark, soft but undeniable, passed between them. Both quickly drew back, a blush creeping onto Alara's cheeks, and Silas's gaze becoming intense. The air thickened with unspoken feelings. It was a forbidden affection, a love that crossed the deep, often hostile, lines of their world. The territory's unspoken rules made such a union difficult, dangerous even. But in the quiet moments they shared, under the vast Dakota sky, their hearts began to speak a language that defied all boundaries, a gentle, burgeoning love that was as brave as the schoolhouse itself. Even after Abernathy's angry departure, Alara and Silas knew their stand wasn't just for themselves, but for the very idea of the school. Yet, as the seasons turned, something wonderful began to happen. The children, oblivious to the grown-up struggles, continued to thrive. They would return home each day, full of new words and stories, their minds buzzing with the wonders Alara taught them. Parents, at first hesitant, started to notice changes in their children. A settler boy, who had once been quick to judge, now spoke of his native friend with respect. A native girl, who had been shy in town, now confidently practiced her English with her family. They saw their children helping each other, sharing knowledge, and laughing together with a genuine warmth that was rare between their communities. Whispers of the schoolhouse began to change. Instead of warnings, there were tales of children learning to count in two languages, of settler children singing native songs and native children reading English books. The sight of a diverse group of children playing together during recess, their joyful shouts echoing across the prairie, became a powerful image. It showed a different way of living, a new possibility for belonging. Small acts of acceptance followed. A mother from the settlement, whose daughter now adored Alara, brought a freshly baked pie to the schoolhouse. A native elder, whose grandson was learning to write his name, offered Alara some healing herbs for her mended whip scars. These were small gestures, but they were significant. They showed a growing crack in the hardened walls of prejudice, a slow but steady shift in the community's heart. The children, through their innocent friendships and shared learning, were quietly teaching their parents that differences didn't have to divide them. The school was becoming a living example that people could live together, learn together, and build a new, shared future. With the school thriving and the community slowly softening, Alara and Silas found themselves sharing more than just the daily tasks of the ranch and the school. Their unspoken affection had grown into a deep, quiet love, a bond forged in shared purpose and mutual respect. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the vast expanse of the prairie fade into twilight, Elara spoke of her past. After the whipping, she began, her voice soft, I felt so alone, like there was no place for me, not truly in either world. She looked at Silas, her eyes reflecting the last light of the sun. But you built this. You built a place where I belong, a place where our children belong. Silas reached out, gently taking her hand. His touch was warm and steady. And you, Elara, he said, his voice a low rumble, you showed me that there's more to this life than just my ranch. You showed me that helping others, standing up for what's right, can build something truly lasting. He paused, his thumb tracing patterns on her skin. I was alone too, in my own way. This land felt like a home, but it was an empty one until the children, filled it. They both understood. Their connection had healed not just Elara's physical and emotional wounds, but the deeper wounds of isolation they both carried. In each other, and in the bustling little schoolhouse filled with diverse children, they had found a new definition of home. It wasn't just a place, but a feeling of belonging, a shared vision for a future where differences could be celebrated, not feared. They were a family now, not by blood, but by choice, by courage, and by the love that had bloomed in the most unlikely of circumstances. Their love was quiet, a steady flame against the vastness of the prairie, promising warmth and light against any darkness. This home, built of wood and spirit, was a testament to their enduring hope. The little schoolhouse, once a daring whisper on the prairie wind, now stood strong and vibrant. It was no longer just a building, but a true beacon, its windows glowing with the light of learning and hope. The laughter of children, a mix of native and settler voices, carried across Silas's land, a joyful song of reconciliation. The prejudices hadn't vanished completely from the territory, but around the school, a new way of life was blossoming. Elara and Silas stood together at the edge of the schoolyard, watching the children play. A group of boys chased a ball, their shouts of joy in both English and the native tongue. A settler girl and a native girl sat side by side under the oak tree, sharing a storybook. It was a sight that once seemed impossible, a dream made real by their shared courage and forbidden affection. Elara leaned her head against Silas's shoulder. His arm, strong and comforting, wrapped around her. The scars from the whipping had long since faded, but the memory served as a powerful reminder of how far they had come and how much they had risked. Their love, born from injustice and defiance, had become the quiet strength that sustained their dream. Look at them, Elara whispered, a soft smile on her face. They are building a different world. Silas squeezed her gently. A world we built for them, he replied, his voice full of pride and tenderness. He looked at Elara, her mixed heritage a beautiful tapestry woven into the land itself, and then out at the children, their faces bright with a future that was open and full of possibility. Their path together hadn't been easy, but it had led them to this moment, to a home they had created not just for themselves, but for a whole new generation. The schoolhouse, a testament to their love and belief, would stand for many years, a shining example that courage, understanding, and affection could truly redefine belonging. They faced the setting sun, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, together.